Snow fell silently in the darkness of the remote wilderness. Kate and Daniel sat by the crackling fireplace in their cozy cabin, sipping hot cocoa and admiring the twinkling lights of their Christmas tree. The holiday had always been a peaceful escape for them, a break from the chaos of the city. But this Christmas Eve was about to become unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. A loud knock echoed through the cabin, startling them both. Daniel set down his mug and glanced at Kate. "Who could that be? We're miles from anyone." Kate frowned, clutching her blanket tightly. Maybe someone's car broke down. Daniel moved cautiously to the door, peering through the peephole. Standing on the porch, illuminated by the soft glow of their Christmas lights, was a man dressed as Santa Claus. Snow clung to his red suit, and his face was shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. "Ho, ho, ho!" the man called cheerfully, his voice muffled by the thick wooden door. "Sorry to disturb you folks, but I've gotten a bit lost. My car broke down a ways back, and I was hoping to use your phone." Kate joined Daniel at the door. "We can't just leave him out there," she whispered. After a moment's hesitation, Daniel unlocked the door. The man stepped inside, shaking snow from his boots. His face was pale, and his eyes darted around the room like a predator surveying its territory. "Thank you so much," he said, his voice dripping with charm. "It's bitter out there tonight." Daniel handed him a phone, but the man waved it off with a chuckle. "No service out here, I imagine. Mind if I warm up for a bit?" Kate forced a smile. "Of course. Can we get you something? Coffee? Hot chocolate?" "Hot chocolate would be delightful," he replied, sitting near the fire. As Kate prepared the drink, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The man's clothes looked too pristine for someone trudging through a snowstorm, and his boots were dry. "So," Daniel started, trying to mask his unease. "Where were you headed?" The man's eyes gleamed. "Oh, just visiting some folks. It's the season of giving, after all." His smile didn't reach his eyes, and Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Kate returned with the hot chocolate, and the man took it with a nod of thanks. The night stretched on uneasily. The man stayed silent, staring into the fire as though lost in thought. When he finally spoke again, his tone was disturbingly casual. "Do you folks believe in Santa Claus?" Kate and Daniel exchanged a nervous glance. "Not since we were kids," Daniel replied cautiously. The man chuckled. "That's a shame. I've always thought there's something magical about believing." Suddenly the lights flickered and went out. The room was plunged into darkness, the only illumination coming from the dying embers of the fire. "Power must have gone out," Daniel muttered, fumbling for a flashlight. But before he could find it, a deep, guttural laugh filled the room. Now," the man said, his voice no longer friendly. "Let's not ruin the fun." A match flared to life, and the man's face was illuminated in its glow. His once jovial expression was gone, replaced by a sinister grin. Kate screamed as the man lunged at Daniel, who barely dodged in time. They realized too late that the visitor wasn't stranded. He was stalking. The cabin became a battleground. The couple fought desperately to escape, but the man seemed to anticipate their every move, toying with them like a cat with mice. "You've been very naughty this year," he taunted, "and naughty kids don't get to see Christmas morning." Kate and Daniel eventually fled into the snow, their breaths visible in the frigid air. Behind them, the cabin glowed faintly in the distance. They could hear the crunch of boots following them, accompanied by that horrible laugh. As they ran, they stumbled upon a clearing where the man had left his sleigh, a grotesque contraption adorned with chains and crude carvings. Inside were ominous sacks that wriggled as though holding something alive. Before they could investigate, the man emerged from the trees, his shadow stretching long and menacing under the moonlight. "Ho, ho, ho," he called mockingly, raising an axe. Kate and Daniel's screams echoed through the forest, swallowed by the falling snow. By morning, the cabin was silent, its windows frosted over. Inside, 2 new stockings hung by the fireplace, their contents bulging unnaturally. Far away, on another lonely road, a man in a Santa suit stood by a broken-down car, smiling at the sound of an approaching vehicle. It began as a joke, a reckless game on Christmas Eve meant to add some excitement to an otherwise dull holiday season. A group of 5 teenagers, Amy, Brandon, Sarah, Max, and Jules, gathered in Sarah's dimly lit basement. The room was decorated with half-hearted attempts at holiday cheer, tinsel drooping lazily, and a lone plastic Christmas tree in the corner. They had found an old, dusty heirloom in the attic, an ornate wooden box engraved with eerie, horned figures. "Let's burn it," Max suggested, smirking as he dangled the box in his hand. The idea seemed absurdly funny at the time, fueled by boredom and a little too much eggnog. Amy hesitated. "Isn't that bad luck or something?" "It's just a stupid old box," Brandon scoffed. "What's the worst that could happen?" They took the heirloom outside into the biting cold and lit it on fire in an old metal barrel. The flames danced strangely, casting shadows that seemed too tall, too long, and far too alive. As the box disintegrated, the air around them grew unnaturally still. The usual sounds of the night, rustling trees, distant cars, the faint hum of wind, disappeared entirely. Jules laughed nervously. "See? Nothing happened." A distant guttural growl interrupted her. It echoed through the trees, low and menacing, like the rumble of thunder in a far-off storm. The friends froze, their breaths visible in the icy air. "What was that?" Amy whispered, her voice trembling. Brandon shrugged, though his confidence faltered. "Probably just an animal." The growl came again, closer this time, followed by a series of heavy, deliberate footsteps crunching through the snow. Then they saw it, a massive, hulking silhouette at the edge of the woods. The figure stood unnaturally tall, with twisted, gnarled horns curving menacingly above its head. Its glowing red eyes pierced the darkness like embers from a dying fire. "Is that Krampus?" Jules stammered, her voice barely audible. "Don't be ridiculous," Brandon said, though his voice cracked as he spoke. But then it stepped closer, revealing its grotesque form. A beastly fusion of man and goat, with fur matted in dirt and blood, sharp claws dragging a chain lined with bells that jingled discordantly. Over its shoulder, it carried a large sack that wriggled unnaturally, as though something, or someone, was inside. The teens bolted for the house, slamming the door behind them. Sarah locked it, her hands shaking. "What the hell was that?" Max yelled. No one had an answer. The sound of chains scraping against the ground echoed outside, followed by heavy thuds against the cabin walls. The lights flickered, plunging the room into alternating moments of darkness and dim light. "I think we summoned it," Amy said, tears streaming down her face. "The box. We shouldn't have burned it." The thudding stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Suddenly, a deafening crash shattered the window near the front door. Brandon screamed as a clawed hand reached through and yanked him outside, his cries cut short by a wet, sickening crunch. The group scrambled into the basement, locking the door behind them. Sarah sobbed uncontrollably, clutching a baseball bat. Max grabbed an old hunting knife from the wall. "We can't stay here," Jules hissed. "It'll get us one by one." "But where do we go?" Amy countered. The sound of bells grew louder, accompanied by deep guttural laughter. Then the door at the top of the stairs creaked open, slowly. "Run!" Max yelled, leading the charge through a back window. They sprinted into the snowy forest, their breaths visible in the freezing air. Behind them, the monstrous figure pursued, its movements impossibly fast for something so large. Jules tripped over a root and fell. Before the others could help, the beast was upon her, dragging her screaming into the darkness. The remaining 3 stumbled upon an old church, its doors barely holding against the wind. Inside, they found temporary sanctuary, barricading the doors with pews. "It's not going to stop," Sarah whispered, gripping the bat tightly. "It's going to kill all of us." Amy nodded, her face pale. "There has to be a way to banish it, something in the stories." They searched the dusty church, finding an ancient book of folklore. Within its pages, they found a passage on Krampus. "To appease the beast, a sacrifice must be made willingly, or the entire group shall perish." The realization hung heavy in the air. "I'm not dying for you!" Max shouted, brandishing the knife. "Nobody's asking you to," Amy snapped. The bells jingled again, closer now, as the creature's shadow loomed outside the stained glass windows. In a desperate bid to save herself, Sarah threw open the doors and ran, leaving Amy and Max behind. Krampus caught her easily, dragging her away as her screams echoed through the night. Max and Amy huddled together, knowing their time was short. "We have to offer something," Amy whispered. The beast burst through the church doors, its fiery eyes locking onto them. Desperate, Amy thrust the folklore book toward the creature. "Take him!" she screamed, shoving Max forward. Krampus paused, its grotesque face contorting into a twisted smile. It took Max, his screams fading into the icy night. Amy was left alone, trembling as dawn broke over the snow-covered landscape. She stumbled back to town, but the experience left her hollow. No one believed her story, dismissing it as hysteria. But every Christmas Eve, she still hears the faint jingle of bells outside her window, a chilling reminder that Krampus never forgets. On a quiet, snowy Christmas Eve, 6-year-old Ella sat on the living room floor, a knitted blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The twinkling lights of the Christmas tree cast a warm glow across the room, and the faint scent of pine filled the air. Ella's excitement was barely contained. Tonight, she was determined to meet Santa Claus. She had begged her parents to let her stay up late, but they had smiled and told her that Santa only came when children were asleep. They kissed her goodnight, unaware she had planned to sneak back downstairs and wait by the tree. As the hours ticked by, Ella felt her eyelids grow heavy. The clock on the mantel struck midnight, and for a moment, the house was completely still. Just as she began to drift off, a sudden noise jolted her awake. A soft thud echoed from the chimney, followed by the faint sound of rustling. Her heart leaped in excitement. "Santa!" Ella tiptoed toward the fireplace, her small feet barely making a sound on the wooden floor. She peeked around the corner, her breath catching in her throat. A man in a red suit crouched by the hearth, brushing soot from his shoulders. His suit was nothing like the pictures she had seen. It was tattered and stained with patches of mismatched fabric sewn over holes. His boots were scuffed, and his once white gloves were yellowed and frayed. As the man turned toward her, Ella's excitement turned to unease. His face wasn't right. His nose was crooked, his mouth stretched unnaturally wide, and his teeth were yellowed and jagged. His eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, a sickly golden hue that sent a shiver down her spine. "Hello, little one," the man rasped, his voice low and gravelly. He reached out with a long, claw-like finger and plucked a cookie from the plate on the mantel, stuffing it into his mouth. Ella's small voice trembled. "Santa?" The man's head tilted sharply, his glowing eyes narrowing as he studied her. A slow, eerie smile spread across his face. "That's right, Ella. I've been watching you all year." Her knees felt weak, but she couldn't move. Something about the way his gaze bore into her kept her rooted to the spot. Slowly, he reached into the sack slung over his shoulder and pulled out a small, crudely wrapped gift. The paper was stained with something dark and sticky, and the smell made Ella's stomach turn. "This is for you," he said, his smile widening as he held it out to her. Ella hesitated, her hands trembling as she took the package. She peeled back the paper, revealing a cracked porcelain doll. Its glassy eyes stared blankly ahead, and its mouth was sewn shut with black thread. As she held it, a faint whispering sound seemed to come from the doll, like the ghost of a voice she couldn't quite understand. "Do you like it?" the man asked, his voice dripping with mock sweetness. Ella shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. She wanted to throw the doll away, but an unexplainable dread told her that doing so would be a terrible mistake. The man's expression darkened. "Now, little one, it's your turn to give me a gift." I don't have anything," Ella stammered, clutching the doll tightly to her chest. The man's claws tapped against the floor as he stepped closer. "Oh, but you do," he murmured. "Something precious, something you don't want to lose." Ella's breath hitched as she realized what he meant. Her parents' words about being a good girl all year echoed in her mind. She took a shaky step back, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, no." The man's smile returned, wider than ever. "It's not up to you." A creak from upstairs broke the spell. Her father's voice called out, "Ella? Are you okay?" The man's glowing eyes flicked toward the stairs, his expression twisting into a snarl. "We'll finish this another time," he hissed, retreating toward the fireplace. In an instant he was gone, leaving behind a faint smell of ash and the cracked doll still clutched in Ella's hands. Her parents rushed downstairs, finding her pale and trembling by the tree. She tried to explain, but they dismissed it as a bad dream. However, as they cleaned up the living room, they noticed claw marks etched into the wooden floor and a strange, unsettling warmth lingering around the fireplace. Ella no durmió la noche siguiente, o el siguiente año. Every Christmas Eve, she stayed awake, clutching the doll tightly because she knew the midnight visitor would return. He always did,